The metal doors of the Universal War Crimes Tribunal slid open with a soft hiss. Commander Zekthara walked slowly into the huge chamber, his four arms hanging at his sides. The reptilian warrior's scales were dull green, marked with old battle scars that told stories of many fights. His yellow eyes looked tired as he moved toward the witness stand in the center of the room. Around him, delegates from 12 different alien species sat in curved rows of seats that rose up like a giant bowl. Some whispered to each other in their strange languages. Others stared at him with curious eyes. A few looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as the scarred veteran approached. Zekthara had been a soldier for over 30 years. He had fought in wars across the galaxy, leading his troops through battles that most beings would rather forget. But today, he was not here as a commander. Today, he was here to tell the truth about something that still haunted his dreams. The tribunal's chief judge, a tall, blue-skinned being with silver robes, raised one hand for silence. The chamber became quiet except for the soft hum of the air systems. "Commander Zekthara of the planet Kessel Prime," the judge said in a voice that echoed through the room. "You have been called to give testimony about the events of the Void War. Specifically, about the combat methods used by the species known as humans." Zekthara nodded slowly and took his place at the witness stand. The metal chair was cold against his scales. He looked out at the sea of alien faces watching him, waiting for his words. "I will tell you what I saw," he said, his voice rough from years of shouting orders over the noise of battle. "But first, you must understand how it all began." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The memories were still sharp, even after 3 years. Before the war started, most of us in the Coalition forces knew very little about humans. They were a young species, barely able to travel between the stars. We had watched their planet for maybe 50 years. What we saw did not impress us. A delegate from the insect-like hive worlds clicked his mandibles together, a sign of agreement. Many in the chamber nodded. Humans fought each other constantly, Zekthara continued. They had wars over resources, over beliefs, over land. Sometimes they fought just because they did not like each other. We thought they were primitive, dangerous to themselves, but not to anyone else. The reptilian commander's yellow eyes grew distant as he remembered those early days. When the collective first attacked human space, we expected it to be over quickly. The machine intelligence had already conquered 4 other species in less than 2 years. Their tactics were perfect. Their weapons were advanced. They did not make mistakes like living beings do. He gestured with one of his 4 arms toward a large screen that showed a map of the galaxy. Red dots marked the systems that had fallen to the collective's invasion. The collective chose to attack humans because they seemed like easy targets. Weak technology, small fleet, no real military structure. The machines calculated that human space would fall in 6 months at most. Zekthara's voice became quieter, forcing the delegates to lean forward to hear him. We were all wrong. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the air systems seemed to hum more softly. The first reports from human territory came after 3 weeks of fighting. Admiral Hayes, who commanded the Coalition fleet, called me to his office on the flagship. I remember thinking he looked confused, maybe even worried. Admiral Hayes had been fighting wars longer than I had been alive. Nothing should have confused him. The reptilian warrior's claws clicked against the metal of the witness stand as he remembered that meeting. The Admiral showed me the reports from human space. The collective had attacked 12 human colonies. According to their battle plans, all 12 should have surrendered within days. Instead, 11 were still fighting. The 12th had gone, silent, but not because they surrendered. They had destroyed themselves rather than let the machines capture their world. Several delegates gasped at this. The idea of destroying one's own world was unthinkable to most species. Admiral Hayes asked me to take my unit and provide support to the human forces. My soldiers were veterans of many campaigns. We had fought the collective before and knew their methods. The Admiral expected us to find scattered groups of survivors who needed evacuation. Zekthara's yellow eyes met those of the chief judge. That is not what we found. He stood up from the witness chair and began to pace slowly, his 4 hands clasped behind his back. My unit consisted of 200 soldiers from 5 different worlds. We had fought together for 8 years. We knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. We had seen the worst that war could offer and survived. The commander stopped pacing and faced the tribunal directly. But nothing had prepared us for what we would see in human space. The delegates waited, hanging on his every word. Our first destination was a human colony called New Austin. Intelligence reports said it had been under attack for 6 weeks. The collective had surrounded it with 3 times the normal force they used for similar targets. We expected to find ruins, maybe a few hiding survivors. Zekthara's voice grew, stronger as he continued. When we dropped out of hyperspace near the colony, our sensors showed something impossible. The human settlement was still there, still fighting. The collective forces were positioned around it in a siege formation, but they were not advancing. He gestured to the screen again, where tactical displays showed the battle positions around New Austin. We opened communications with the human commander, a colonel named Jake Morrison. His voice was calm when he answered our call, not desperate, not panicked, calm. He thanked us for coming but said his forces did not need evacuation. They needed ammunition and medical supplies. The insect delegate clicked his mandibles in disbelief. Impossible. No species could hold against collective forces for 6 weeks with primitive weapons. Zekthara looked at the delegate with tired eyes. That is what I thought too. That is what we all thought. We were about to learn how wrong we could be. The reptilian commander returned to his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. Colonel Morrison invited us to land and see their defenses. What we found changed everything I thought I knew about war. He paused, looking down at his scarred hands. The humans had turned their entire colony into a fortress, but not like any fortress we had ever seen. They used materials that should not work as armor. They built weapons from farming equipment and mining tools. They had created a defense system that made no sense according to military doctrine, but somehow it worked. The chamber remained silent, waiting for more. But the strangest thing was not their weapons or their defenses. It was the humans themselves. They had been fighting for 6 weeks against impossible odds. They had lost friends and family members. Their supplies were running low. By every logical measure, they should have been broken, ready to surrender. Zekthara's voice became barely above a whisper. Instead, they were laughing. Several delegates made sounds of confusion in their various languages. They told jokes while they repaired their weapons. They sang songs while they built barricades. They played games with their children between battles. It was as if the war was just another problem to solve, not a matter of life and death. Igua, reptilian warrior, looked up at the tribunal with eyes full of old pain. That was when I began to understand that we had encountered something new in the galaxy. Something that would change everything we thought we knew about war, about survival, and about what it means to fight for something you believe in. He stood up again, his forearms spread wide. The story I am about to tell you will disturb many of you. It will challenge what you believe about warfare and about the nature of civilized behavior. But it is the truth. And you asked me to tell the truth. The chief judge nodded slowly. Then let me tell you about the humans who taught us that. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to accept that they can be defeated. Commander Zekthara walked back to the witness stand. His yellow eyes looked out at the alien delegates as he prepared to continue his story. The chamber remained quiet, everyone waiting to hear what had happened when his forces first met human warriors. When we landed on New Austin, Zekthara began, Colonel Morrison met us at the landing pad. He was not what I expected a human military leader to look like. He was shorter than most of my soldiers and had gray hair that looked like he had not combed it in days. His uniform was dirty and had holes in it from battle damage. The reptilian commander gestured with one of his 4 hands, but his eyes were sharp and alert. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm. He smiled at us like we were old friends coming to visit, not rescue troops arriving at a war zone. Zekthara paused, remembering that first meeting. Morrison walked us through their defenses, explaining their setup like he was giving a tour of his home. The first thing we noticed was the smell. It was not the clean, sterile smell of a proper military base. It smelled like sweat, oil, and something else I could not identify. A delegate from the aquatic mer worlds raised a webbed hand. What was the other smell? Fear, Zekthara replied simply. But not the kind of fear that makes you want to run away. It was the kind that makes you focus, that sharpens your mind. The humans were afraid, but they had learned to use their fear as a tool. He continued walking as he spoke, his claws clicking on the metal floor. The defenses themselves were amazing and terrible at the same time. They had taken farming equipment and turned it into weapons. Machines meant for harvesting crops had been changed into automated guns. Tools for digging had become launchers for explosives. The commander stopped and faced the tribunal directly. But the most shocking thing was how they had built their barriers. Most species use metal, energy shields, or reinforced materials for protection. The humans had used everything. Old furniture, broken vehicles, even books and clothing packed into walls. Several delegates made sounds of disbelief. I asked Morrison how walls made of such materials could stop collective weapons. He laughed and said they could not. The walls were not meant to stop the enemy. They were meant to slow them down and confuse them. Zekthara's voice became more animated as he remembered. Morrison explained that the collective machines calculated the best way through defenses based on material strength and structure. When they encountered barriers made of random objects, their targeting systems became confused. They would waste time and ammunition trying to find the most efficient attack pattern. The reptilian warrior gestured toward the tactical display screen. While the machines were confused, human soldiers would attack from unexpected directions. They crawled through drainage pipes, dropped from ceiling panels, even hid inside their own defensive walls to surprise the enemy. The chief judge leaned forward. These tactics seemed chaotic. How did they coordinate their attacks? That was another surprise, Zekthara replied. They used music. The chamber erupted in confused chatter. The judge called for silence. Music? The judge asked. Zekthara nodded. The collective jammed all electronic communications. Standard military radio, computer networks, even simple signal devices stopped working. So the humans used drums, horns, and even singing to send messages to each other. He smiled slightly, the first time during his testimony. Sergeant Lisa Campbell showed me how it worked. She would play a pattern on a small drum, and soldiers in other parts of the colony would respond with different patterns. Each rhythm meant something different. Attack, retreat, enemy position, request for supplies. The commander's expression became serious again, but Campbell was famous for something else. She had led 17 missions inside collective walking machines. These were huge metal vehicles protected by thick armor and energy shields. Normal attacks could not damage them. Zekthara paused, letting the weight of that number sink in. 17 times Campbell and her squad had crawled through ventilation systems to get inside these machines. Once inside, they would plant explosives and escape before the blast. It should have been impossible. The spaces were too small, too well guarded, too dangerous. A delegate from the Crystalline Shard Confederation spoke up. How did they survive? Such missions? Campbell showed me, Zekthara replied. She was small even for a human. She could fit through spaces that larger beings could not use. But that was not the most important thing. The most important thing was how she thought about the problem. He began pacing again, his 4 hands moving as he explained. Most soldiers would look at a collective walker and see an impenetrable fortress. Campbell looked at it and saw a puzzle to solve. She studied the machines, learned their weaknesses, found ways to exploit their design flaws. The reptilian commander stopped and looked directly at the tribunal. She told me that humans have a saying, there is always a way. They believe that no problem is truly impossible to solve. You just have to be creative enough to find the solution. Zekthara returned to his chair, settling his large frame carefully. Private. Danny Rodriguez was another example of this creativity. He was young, maybe 20 human years old. Before the war, he had been studying to become a doctor. When the collective invaded, he joined the defense forces. The commander's voice became respectful. Rodriguez could not fight like the other soldiers. He was not strong enough to carry heavy weapons or fast enough to run long distances. But he had a gift for understanding how things worked. Zekthara gestured toward the screen, where images of improvised weapons appeared. Rodriguez had built magnetic pulse grenades using parts from medical equipment. The collective had never encountered such weapons before. Their armor was designed to stop energy blasts and projectiles, not magnetic disruption. He leaned forward in his chair. These grenades did not destroy the machines directly. Instead, they scrambled their control systems. Collective units would start moving in circles, firing at their own forces, or simply shut down completely. The insect delegate clicked his mandibles. Ingenious. But how did one young human develop such weapons? That is what I asked Rodriguez, Zekthara replied. He told me he had read about magnetic pulse technology in his medical studies. Human medical equipment used similar principles for certain treatments. He simply applied the same science to a different problem. The reptilian commander stood up again, his movements showing his age and the weight of his memories. But the thing that impressed me most about Rodriguez was not his weapons. It was his attitude. When I asked him if he was afraid of dying, he looked confused by the question. Zekthara's voice became quieter. He said that of course he was afraid. Fear was natural and useful. But dying was not the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing would be failing to protect the people he cared about. The chamber remained silent as the commander continued. Rodriguez showed me pictures of his family back on Earth. His parents, his younger sister, his grandparents. He talked about them the same way he talked about his weapons. With love, pride, and determination. The reptilian warrior's yellow eyes grew distant. That was when I began to understand something important about human psychology. For most species, self-preservation is the strongest instinct. We will fight to protect ourselves, our resources, our territory. But humans seem to have a different priority system. He looked directly at the chief judge. They will sacrifice themselves to protect others, especially those they consider family or friends. This is not unusual behavior occasionally, but for humans it appears to be standard procedure. Zekthara walked closer to the tribunal. During our 3-day stay at New Austin, I watched human soldiers make decisions that defied every survival instinct I understood. They would volunteer for the most dangerous missions. They would give up their food, their rest, their safety for the benefit of others. His voice became stronger, and they did this not because they were ordered to, but because it felt natural to them. When I asked Colonel Morrison about it, he seemed surprised by my question. He said that taking care of each other was just what humans did. The commander returned to the witness stand for the final time. When we left New Austin, my soldiers were quiet during the journey to our next assignment. Finally, my lieutenant asked me what I thought about the humans we had met. Zekthara paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces. I told him we had encountered something new in the galaxy, a species that fought not just to survive, but to protect something they valued more than their own lives. I said this made them incredibly dangerous to their enemies and incredibly valuable as allies. He sat down heavily in the witness chair. I was right about both things, but I had no idea how dangerous and how valuable they truly were. That understanding would come later, in places where the fighting was much worse and the stakes were much higher. Commander Zekthara stood quietly at the witness stand for a long moment. The delegates in the tribunal chamber could see that he was preparing to tell them something difficult. His yellow eyes looked down at his four hands, and his breathing became slower and deeper. The next part of my story, he began softly, is the one that still visits me in my dreams. Even now, 3 years later, I sometimes wake up thinking about what we found at New Carthage. The reptilian warrior looked up at the chief judge. 2 weeks after we left New Austin, we received a distress signal from the mining colony of New Carthage. The signal was weak and broken, but it contained coordinates and a simple message. Still here, still fighting. Zekthara began his slow, pacing again, his claws clicking on the metal floor. New Carthage had been silent for almost a month. Coalition intelligence believed the collective had taken the colony and turned it into what they called a processing center. These were places where the machines captured living beings and used them to increase their computational power. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Processing centers were one of the most feared aspects of fighting the collective. The distress signal confused everyone. If New Carthage had been captured, there should be no survivors to send messages. If it had not been captured, why had they been silent for so long? The commander stopped pacing and faced the tribunal. Admiral, Hayes ordered my unit to investigate. We expected to find either nothing or a trap. What we found was something much more disturbing. Zekthara activated the tactical display screen. An image of New Carthage appeared, showing a small mining settlement, built into the side of a mountain. New Carthage was different from New Austin. It was smaller, with only about 300 people. Most of them were miners and their families. They had no military training and very few weapons. He gestured at different parts of the settlement on the screen. When we arrived, the surface buildings were empty but undamaged. There were no signs of battle, no bodies, no indication of what had happened to the colonists. But our sensors detected life signs deep underground, in the mining tunnels. The reptilian commander's voice became more tense. We followed the tunnel system down into the mountain. The passages were narrow and dark, lit only by emergency lighting that flickered on and off. The air was stale and smelled of fear and exhaustion. Zekathara paused, remembering. After walking for almost an hour through the tunnels, we found them, 43 human colonists led by a woman named Lieutenant Commander Amy Stevens. They had been living underground for 3 weeks, fighting a war that no one on the surface knew was happening. The chief judge leaned forward. Fighting whom? If the collective had not captured the colony, what were they fighting? The collective had captured the colony, Zekathara replied. But they had not captured all of it. He activated new images on the screen, showing crude maps drawn on tunnel walls. Stevens explained the situation to us while she continued working on some kind of device made from mining equipment. She spoke in a calm, quiet voice as if she were discussing the weather instead of a life-or-death struggle. The commander's voice became filled with respect. 3 weeks earlier, collective forces had taken the surface settlement in less than an hour. Most of the colonists were captured and taken to processing centers, but Stevens and a few others had been in the deep tunnels when the attack began. Zekathara gestured at the tunnel maps. Instead of trying to escape or hide, Stevens had organized the survivors into what she called disruption cells. Each cell had 3 or 4 people and was responsible for a different type of sabotage operation. The delegates listened with growing amazement as the reptilian warrior continued. The collective had set up their processing equipment in the main mining chambers. They needed the colonists alive and conscious to extract their mental capacity. But Stevens had found ways to interfere with this process. He pointed to different sections of the tunnel system. One cell would cut power cables at random intervals. Another would introduce false signals into the collective's communication network. A third would contaminate the air supply with substances that made the machine's sensors malfunction. The insect delegate clicked his mandibles in confusion. How could untrained civilians develop such sophisticated sabotage techniques? Zekathara smiled grimly. Stevens was not just any civilian. Before coming to New Carthage, she had been a teacher on Earth. She had taught children about science, engineering, and problem-solving. The commander activated another image, showing Stevens working with a group of colonists. She told me that teaching children had prepared her for fighting the collective. Children ask difficult questions and need creative solutions. They do not accept that something is impossible just because adults say it is. Zekathara's voice became more animated. Stevens had applied the same principles to their situation. When the collective expected them to be helpless prisoners, she asked, "What if we are not helpless?" When the machines assumed their victims would be too frightened to resist, she asked, "What if fear makes us more dangerous?" The reptilian warrior walked closer to the tribunal. The results were remarkable. The collective processing center was operating at only 30% efficiency. Machine units were being reassigned constantly to deal with equipment failures and mysterious problems. The entire operation was slowly falling apart. He paused, looking down at his hands again. But the cost was terrible. Stevens and her people had been living on emergency rations for 3 weeks. They had no proper medical supplies. Several colonists had been injured during sabotage operations, and they were getting worse. Zekathara's voice became quieter. When I asked Stevens why they did not try to escape through the tunnel system, she looked at me like I had asked a stupid question. She pointed toward the main chambers where the other colonists were being held. The commander's yellow eyes met those of the chief judge. She said they could not leave their friends and neighbors. Even if escape was possible, it would mean abandoning people who were depending on them. For Stevens, this was not an acceptable option. The chamber remained silent as Zekathara continued. I tried to explain that rescue was impossible. There were too many collective units and the processing equipment was too well defended. The logical choice was to evacuate the survivors and call for reinforcements. The reptilian warrior shook his head slowly. Stevens listened to my tactical assessment with the same calm attention she had shown everything else. Then she thanked me for the information and went back to work on her device. He gestured toward the screen, where technical diagrams appeared. I asked her what she was building. She explained that it was a resonance generator, designed to interfere with the collective's neural network connections. If it worked, it would disrupt the processing operation and possibly free the captured colonists. The crystalline delegate spoke up. Such a device would require advanced knowledge of collective technology. How could a teacher build something so complex? Zekathara's expression became thoughtful. Stevens had been studying the enemy for 3 weeks. Every time her sabotage teams went out, they brought back information about collective equipment and procedures. She had been learning how the machines worked by watching how they responded to different types of interference. The commander activated new images showing the improvised laboratories the colonists had built in the tunnels. She had turned mining equipment into testing devices. She had used children's toys to build communication systems. She had even used cooking supplies to create chemical compounds that confused collective sensors. His voice filled with admiration. But the most impressive thing was not her technical skills. It was her leadership. 43 people had been following her orders for 3 weeks, living in terrible conditions, risking their lives on dangerous missions. Zekthara looked directly at the tribunal, and they were not following her because she was the highest-ranking person, or because she had the best weapons. They were following her because she gave them hope and a way to fight back. The reptilian warrior returned to his chair, moving slowly. Stevens asked me if my soldiers would help with one final operation. She wanted to use her resonance generator to disrupt the processing center, while we provided a distraction on the surface. He sat down heavily, his forearms resting on the sides of the chair. I told her it was suicide. Even if the device worked, the collective would respond with overwhelming force. We might save some of the prisoners, but everyone involved in the operation would probably die. Zekthara's voice became barely above a whisper. Stevens nodded and said she understood. Then she asked me a question that I still think about every day. The chamber leaned forward to hear his words. She asked me if I had children. I told her I had 2 sons back on Kessel Prime. She smiled and said she had been teaching children for 15 years before coming to New Carthage. The commander looked up at the delegates with tired eyes. Stevens said that everything she had learned about courage, she had learned from watching children face their fears. Children are afraid of many things, but they do not let fear stop them from protecting the people they love. His voice became stronger. Commander Zekthara remained standing at the witness stand for several minutes after finishing his story about Amy Stevens. The tribunal chamber was completely quiet. Many of the alien delegates looked uncomfortable, as if they were trying to process what they had heard. The chief judge finally broke the silence. Commander, your testimony has been disturbing, but we understand there is more to tell. Zekthara nodded slowly. Yes, the story I am about to share happened 6 months later, during the largest space battle of the Void War. What I witnessed that day challenged everything I thought I knew about military tactics and the nature of courage. The reptilian warrior activated the tactical display screen. Images of damaged spacecraft appeared showing vessels that looked like they had been patched together from spare parts. After New Carthage, my unit was assigned to support the Coalition fleet near the Centauri system. The collective had gathered their largest force yet, preparing to attack the core human worlds. Admiral Hayes needed every available ship to stop them. Zekathara gestured at the images on the screen. That is when we first encountered Captain Rick Harris and his Ghost Fleet. The insect delegate clicked his mandibles. Ghost Fleet? That is what the Coalition forces called them, Zekathara explained. 17 civilian ships that had been converted into warships using whatever materials Harris and his crew could find. Most military commanders would have classified these vessels as space junk. The commander changed the display to show technical specifications. The flagship was an old cargo hauler called the Texas Star. It had been built to carry mining equipment between planets, not to fight wars. Harris had attached weapons to it using cargo clamps and welding equipment. He pointed to different parts of the ship designs. The other vessels were even more unusual. Passenger liners with missile launchers bolted to their sides. Construction, ships carrying bombs instead of building materials. Even a few pleasure craft that had been turned into fast attack vehicles. Zekathara's voice became filled with disbelief. When Admiral Hayes first saw Harris's fleet, he ordered them to retreat to a safe distance. These ships had no business in a major space battle. They would be destroyed in minutes by collective forces. The reptilian commander began his familiar pacing, but Captain Harris refused the order. He requested permission to join the battle formation, claiming his ships could provide valuable support. Admiral Hayes was furious. He threatened to have Harris arrested for disobeying orders. Zekthara stopped and looked directly at the tribunal. That is when Harris explained who his crew was and why they were there. The commander activated new images showing personnel files. Harris had been a civilian ship captain before the war. He transported supplies and passengers between human colonies. When the collective invaded, his regular routes were disrupted and many of his friends lost their homes or their lives. The display showed pictures of ordinary people: mechanics, teachers, farmers, shopkeepers. His crew was made up of volunteers from the colonies that had been attacked. Chief Engineer Kate Miller had lost her family when the collective destroyed her homeworld. Navigator Ben Torres was looking for his missing brother. Weapons Officer Sandy Clark wanted revenge for her destroyed business. Zekthara's voice became more emotional. These were not trained soldiers. They were ordinary people who had decided to fight back against the machines that had taken everything from them. Harris had given them a way to contribute to the war effort. The reptilian warrior changed the display to show the battle formation. Admiral Hayes realized he could not convince Harris to retreat. The Ghost Fleet was going to fight whether they had permission or not. So he decided to find a way to use them that might keep them alive for more than a few minutes. The commander pointed to positions on the tactical map. He assigned Harris's ships to protect the evacuation convoy. Their job was to stay behind the main battle line and help civilian vessels escape if the coalition forces were defeated. Zekthara's yellow eyes grew distant as he remembered, but Harris had other ideas. The display changed to show real-time battle recordings from that day. When the collective fleet attacked, they focused their main assault on our largest warships. This was standard tactical doctrine. Destroy the enemy's strongest units first, then clean up the smaller vessels. The commander's voice became tense with the memory. The coalition fleet fought bravely, but we were outnumbered 3-1. Our defense lines began to collapse under the enemy assault. It looked like we would lose the battle and the evacuation convoy would be destroyed. He activated a new sequence showing the Ghost Fleet's movements. That is when Harris made his move. Instead of staying in the rear guard position, he led his 17 ships directly into the middle of the battle. Several delegates made sounds of shock and disbelief. I was monitoring communications from my command ship. I heard Admiral Hayes screaming at Harris to retreat, calling him insane and suicidal. Harris's response was calm and polite. Zekthara's voice took on a slight accent as he quoted the human captain. He said, "Admiral, with respect, my people did not come here to watch from a safe distance. We came here to fight." Then he closed the communication channel and led his fleet straight toward the largest collective dreadnought. The reptilian commander activated battle footage that showed the Ghost Fleet's attack. What happened next should have been a massacre. 17 improvised warships attacking a vessel that was 50 times their size and 100 times more powerful. Any rational tactical analysis would predict their complete destruction within minutes. He paused, letting the tension build. But rational tactical analysis did not account for human creativity. The display showed detailed recordings of the Ghost Fleet's assault. Harris had studied collective battle patterns for months. He knew that their targeting systems prioritized threats based on firepower and defensive capability. His ships registered as minimal threats, so the dreadnought's weapons initially ignored them. Zekthara pointed to specific moments in the battle footage. By the time the collective realized what was happening, Harris's ships were too close for the big weapons to target effectively. The Ghost Fleet scattered in all directions, using their small size and maneuverability to avoid being hit. The commander's voice became filled with admiration. But they were not just trying to survive. Each ship had a specific mission. Miller had rigged the cargo haulers to explode when they collided with enemy vessels. Torres was using the passenger liners to ram sensitive equipment on the dreadnought's hull. He changed the display to show internal ship communications. I was able to monitor their tactical frequency during the battle. Harris was coordinating 17 different ship types, each with different capabilities and limitations. It should have been impossible to manage such a chaotic formation. The reptilian warrior's voice became excited. But Harris was not managing them like a traditional fleet. He was managing them like a family working together to solve a problem. Each captain knew their job and was trusted to figure out the best way to do it. Zekthara activated recordings of the Ghost Fleet's communications during the battle. Listen to how they talk to each other. No formal military protocols, no rigid command structure, just people working together, encouraging each other, sharing information and ideas. The tribunal heard voices calling out enemy positions, coordinating attacks, and even joking with each other in the middle of deadly combat. Captain Miller reporting successful impact on Target 7. Kate's barbecue special delivered as ordered. Nice work, Kate. Ben here. I am seeing weak spots opening up near the engine section. Sandy, can you get some fireworks over there? On my way, Ben. Save some fun for the rest of us. Zekthara stopped the recordings and looked at the amazed delegates. They were treating the most dangerous battle of the war like a challenging group project. Each person contributed their skills, supported their teammates, and adapted to changing situations. The commander activated new footage showing the climax of the battle. The Ghost Fleet's attack disrupted the collective dreadnought's coordination systems. Our main fleet was able to regroup and launch a counterattack. Within 2 hours, we had turned a certain defeat into a decisive victory. He paused, his expression becoming sad. But the cost was terrible. 8 of Harris's 17 ships were destroyed during the battle, including the Texas Star. Zekthara's voice became quiet and respectful. Captain Harris went down with his ship, but he continued coordinating the attack until the very end. His final transmission was not a distress call or a goodbye message. It was tactical data that helped the surviving ships complete their mission. The reptilian commander looked directly at the chief judge. Harris died the way he had lived during the war, putting the mission first, protecting others, and refusing to give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. He returned to the witness stand and sat down heavily. After the battle, Admiral Hayes sent a message to all coalition forces. He said that Harris and his Ghost Fleet had saved not just the evacuation convoy, but possibly the entire war effort. Zekthara's yellow eyes looked out at the tribunal with deep emotion. Commander Zekthara sat quietly in the witness chair for a long time after finishing his story about Captain Harris. The tribunal chamber was completely silent. Every delegate seemed to be thinking about what they had heard. The reptilian warrior could see confusion, concern, and even fear in some of their faces. The chief judge finally spoke. Commander, your testimony has been very detailed and disturbing, but we still need to understand something important. The war ended 8 months ago. What happened to humanity after their victory? Are they now a threat to galactic peace? Zekthara looked up at the judge with tired yellow eyes. That is the most important question of all, and the answer might surprise you. He stood up slowly and activated the display screen one final time. Images appeared showing human colonies and settlements from recent months. 3 months after the collective was defeated, I was given a new assignment. The coalition wanted someone to visit human space and prepare a report about their post-war activities. Many member species were worried about what humans might do with their new military reputation. The commander gestured at the peaceful scenes on the screen. I expected to find a militarized society preparing for their next conquest. Most species that become powerful in war continue to think like warriors even after the fighting ends. They build bigger armies, demand more territory, and look for new enemies to defeat. Zekthara's voice became thoughtful. But that is not what I found in human space. The display showed images of reconstruction projects, schools, hospitals, and farming communities. Instead of military bases, I found hospitals being built to treat wounded veterans. Instead of weapons factories, I found schools where former soldiers were learning peaceful trades. Instead of victory parades, I found memorial walls listing the names of those who had died. The reptilian warrior walked closer to the tribunal. Every human settlement I visited had these memorial walls. They were not celebrating their military victories. They were mourning their losses and honoring the people who had sacrificed their lives. He activated new images showing detailed memorial sites. At New Austin, Colonel Morrison had built a garden around the memorial wall. Each name was accompanied by a story about that person's life before the war, their hobbies, their families, their dreams that would never be fulfilled. Zekthara's voice became more emotional. Morrison told me that remembering the dead as people, not just as soldiers, helped the survivors understand the true cost of war. Every name on the wall represented a life that had been lost, a family that had been broken, a future that would never happen. The commander changed the display to show images of former soldiers working in civilian jobs. I met Sergeant Campbell, who had led those dangerous missions inside collective machines. She was now teaching children how to repair farming equipment. When I asked her about her military service, she seemed uncomfortable discussing it. He paused, remembering that conversation. Campbell said that the skills she had learned during the war were useful, but she preferred to use them for building things instead of destroying them. She had seen enough destruction to last several lifetimes. The crystalline delegate spoke up. But surely some humans wanted to continue fighting. Military victories often create appetite for more conquest. Zekathara shook his head. I found very few humans who wanted to continue their military careers. Most were eager to return to peaceful activities. They had fought because they had to, not because they enjoyed it. The reptilian warrior activated images showing human veterans struggling with psychological problems. But the war had left deep scars on many of them. I met soldiers who could not sleep because of nightmares about battles they had fought. Others who jumped at sudden noises or became nervous in crowded places. His voice became concerned. At first, I thought this was a sign of weakness. Most warrior species take pride in their battle experiences and celebrate their victories, but humans seem to be suffering because of theirs. Zekathara looked directly at the tribunal. Then I met Dr. Sarah Martinez, a human psychologist who was treating these veterans. She explained something about human psychology that I had not understood before. The commander activated images showing therapy sessions and support groups. Dr. Martinez said that humans are naturally empathetic beings. They feel emotional connections not just to their own families and friends, but to all living creatures. This empathy makes them excellent at working together and protecting others. He paused, organizing his thoughts. But this same empathy makes war very difficult for them psychologically. When they kill enemy soldiers, they understand that they are ending someone's life, someone who might have family and friends who will mourn their death. The insect delegate clicked his mandibles in confusion. How can a species be both excellent warriors and disturbed by warfare? That is exactly what makes them so dangerous, Zekathara replied. They fight effectively because they understand the cost of failure, but they also understand the cost of success. This knowledge makes them careful about when and how they use violence. The reptilian commander walked back toward the witness stand. Dr. Martinez told me that humans have a saying, the best warrior is the one who never has to fight. They believe that violence should always be the last option, used only when all other solutions have failed. He sat down and looked out at the assembled delegates. During my visit to human space, I attended several meetings where they discussed their future military policies. I expected to hear plans for expansion, demands for tribute from defeated enemies, or preparations for new conquests. Zekathara's voice became filled with respect. Instead, they were discussing how to prevent future wars. They wanted to share their defensive technologies with other species, so that everyone could better protect themselves from threats like the collective. The chief judge leaned forward. They wanted to give away their military advantages? Yes, Zekathara replied simply. They said that their security was best protected by making sure their neighbors were also secure. They believed that helping others become stronger would create a more stable galaxy for everyone. The commander activated images showing human diplomatic missions. They were also working to establish better communication with species that had previously been hostile. Instead of demanding surrender from former enemies, they were offering trade agreements and technological assistance. He gestured at specific examples on the screen. The hive worlds, which had supported the collective, were now receiving human medical aid to help their wounded civilians. The machine worlds that had been neutral were being offered human engineering expertise to rebuild their damaged infrastructure. Zekathara's voice became stronger. When I asked human leaders why they were helping former enemies, they gave me the same type of answer I had heard throughout the war. They said it was simply what humans did. Taking care of others, solving problems together, building instead of destroying. The reptilian warrior stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. I spent 6 weeks traveling through human space, interviewing hundreds of people, observing their reconstruction efforts and studying their plans for the future. My conclusion was clear. He looked directly at each delegate in turn. Humanity is indeed dangerous. Their military capabilities have been proven beyond question. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others makes them nearly impossible to defeat through conventional warfare. The chamber remained completely silent as he continued. But they are dangerous only to those who threaten innocent people. Their warrior culture is balanced by strong ethical principles that prevent them from becoming conquerors or oppressors. Zakthara returned to the witness stand for the final time. The humans taught me that there are two types of dangerous species in the galaxy. Those who are dangerous because they enjoy causing harm, and those who are dangerous because they will do anything to prevent harm from being caused to others. His voice became firm and clear. Humanity belongs to the second category. They should be welcomed into the galactic community not despite their military capabilities, but because of how they choose to use those capabilities. The reptilian commander looked up at the chief judge. The galaxy is full of species that can destroy their enemies, but it has very few species that know when to stop fighting and start healing. Humanity has demonstrated both the ability to wage war and the wisdom to choose peace. He stood up one final time and faced the entire tribunal. My recommendation is simple. Humanity should be granted full membership in the Galactic Coalition immediately, not as a junior partner or probationary member, but as a full equal with all the rights and responsibilities that status includes. Zakthara's yellow eyes looked out at the assembled delegates with complete conviction. The universe is a dangerous place. There will always be new threats, new challenges that require military solutions. When those challenges arise, we will want humans fighting beside us, not against us. The commander's voice became quiet but intense. Because I have learned something important during this war. The most valuable allies are not those who are eager to fight, but those who fight only when they must. Not those who enjoy victory, but those who understand its cost.